Welcome friends to the first inverse versus video on this channel. Here you see we're doing Ulquiorra versus Coyote Starrk. Please remember to like and subscribe. Guys, I am less than 200 followers away from that 1K milestone. Please help me out. I appreciate all of you guys so much. Please comment down below. I want to hear what you guys think. I already know this topic is contentious, so I'm ready to battle it out. For my own sanity, I went and reread all of Ulquiorra's chapters and all of Stark's chapters. This is going to be broken down in sections, and each section is going to be more of a discussion, not so much me just listing their feats and then comparing them, because then we'll be here all day. So I'll kind of do a discussion format, then say who I think wins in each category at the end, and then I'll give my final verdict for each round. First, we're going to start with the spiritual pressure department, and we can just start off with saying that Starkk is 1 and Ulquiorra is 4. Simple, right? Starkk in base is already 3 ranks higher than Ulquiorra, but since we don't have concrete numbers, that doesn't mean too much right now anyway. But what we can point out is the opponents they fought and their opponent's spiritual pressure. Shunsui was Stark's opponent, and he is one of the more powerful captains, as explained by Yamamoto back in the Soul Society arc. Shunsui not only has age, but well over 500 years of experience, and Stark's res was going to push him into using Bankai. He also fought Jushiro, and when fighting together, as head captain Yamamoto stated, Jushiro and Shunsui are unmatched. Jushiro boasted the largest amount of spiritual pressure out of any captain not named Yamamoto, and we know this because of the 1,000-year Blood War. Jushiro thought that Shunsui and himself made an even fight with both using Shikai. This feat is made more impressive by the fact that neither Love or Rose, with their mask on and using Shikai, could damage Starkk. Now, I'm not completely sure if this is a Hiedo feat or a spiritual pressure feat, but I'm leaving here as notable. Ulquiorra only ever fought 2 people on screen, Grimmjow and Ichigo/White. First, we'll look at White. Despite what people say, Ulquiorra was no match for White. In all 3 versions of the fight that exist, he's getting his face stomped in, literally. People like to argue that Ulquiorra would have done better if Kubo got to do the fight exactly how he wanted to, but this is wishful thinking. Kubo said he wishes the fight was longer. That doesn't mean competitive. If I were to infer what Kubo meant, I think it just means that Ulquiorra was going to become more brutalized as the fight went on, showing Ichigo's descent into madness and Ulquiorra kind of gaining a heart. Ichigo's rage moment isn't about the fight. It's not really about Ulquiorra. It's supposed to be about Ichigo going off the reservation, as it were. Ulquiorra, Segunda Etapa, his Ascordus, and the Lanza del Rapago were all overpowered by quick ceros from Vasto Lord Ichigo. They didn't cancel them out. Ulquiorra specifies that his blasts were overtaken, and it's shown in the manga, showing they were not close in power. If you need any more proofs, when Lanza detonated in White's hand, it did not harm him at all. And now, I'm not saying Starkk is equal to White. That's not what I'm saying. If someone tries to say that's what I'm saying, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you can't scale Ulquiorra to White. You can scale him to higher than Masked Ichigo, who at the time was stronger than Grimmjow and Rez, but that isn't that impressive, seeing as Ichigo was not the strongest character at the time. By the time Ichigo recovered from his fight with Grimmjow and got his Zenkai boost, he was capable of cutting Ulquiorra's hero, which he couldn't do before with his Bankai. He then, with his mask on, was more powerful than base Ulquiorra. This was confirmed when Ulquiorra's Cero did no damage to Ichigo, but this was quickly reversed when Ulquiorra went into Res 1 and proceeded to neg Ichigo's full-powered mask on Getsuga Tensho. He then transformed to his Res 2, and then he became imperceptible to Ichigo. This isn't that impressive, as I said, because Ichigo wasn't the most powerful in the series at that point at max power. He was only stronger than base Ulquiorra. Given an example of power, Shunsui is about equal to Starkk in base. Base Starkk is higher than base Ulquiorra, putting base Shunsui equal to or slightly higher than Bankai Ichigo, and who knows with his mask on. Shikai Shunsui grew in about the same amount of power as Starkk in his res, showing that the boosts are similar and maybe not the 10 that everyone thinks it is. We also can't speculate on the boost that Segunda Etapa gives. I say this because according to the translations for the data book, both Yami's physical strength and spirit energy increased tenfold when he enters res. His subsequent transformations were activated when Yami became angrier, and he just grew in power based on his size. There's no way Ulquiorra in Res 1 or 2 is a 10 times boost, and yet he's still somehow behind Yami in power. Based on that, we can assume Ulquiorra is not a 10 times boost, talking about his Res 2, and he never states his Segunda Etapa to be more powerful than a regular one. He only specifies that he hit it from Aizen, and the data book reflects this. Yami confirms this by stating he's twice as strong as Ulquiorra. Now, Yami isn't that impressive when it comes to sensing power, but it should also be noted that he wasn't impressed by white cero that killed Ulquiorra. I have no problem thinking Ulquiorra passes Starkk in SP, but I don't think it's significant at all. I would say they're closer than people think. Ulquiorra was damaged from a cero blowing up in his hand due to Grimmjow when they were both in base. Both of them were damaged by this, Grimmjow being hurt more than Ulquiorra, but it's very telling that base to base, Grimmjow and Ulquiorra are close enough to cancel out cero. They were both damaged, and they're not blitzing each other. And this is kind of consistent between Ichigo's showings between the two. So let's give a conservative number between the power of the bases of these Espada. So if I'm being conservative, I would say it's about 1.5 times. So since Starkk is 3 slots higher ahead of Ulquiorra, it's about 4.5 when you do the math. The reason I say this is because when the top 3 Espada showed up in Hueco Mundo, Shunsui could tell that Starkk was more powerful than Holybell. But he asked him, between you and Badagon, which one of you is number 1? And Starkk says, I'm number 1. He goes, I thought so. Meaning that from Starkk to Holybell, there's a significant enough difference that he can tell Starkk is stronger, but between him and Badagon, it's a lot closer. So I think that 1.5 is very conservative and very considerate. Since Starkk is 3 slots higher ahead of Ulquiorra, that's a 4.5 boost. So let's do some math. So let's start off with Ulquiorra. Let's just give him a base power of 5, right? 5 just represents his overall spirit energy. Starkk then starts at 22.5 due to the 1.5 increase 3 times. Ulquiorra gets a 5 times boost from his res as we established, so that puts him up to 25. That's slightly higher than Starkk's base. Let's give him another 5 times boost, which puts him up to 125, which is his second res 2. Starkk, when he gets his res finally, is at 112. Ulquiorra comes out with higher spirit energy, but not significant enough that he overwhelms Starkk. It's a 13-point difference. If you think that's significant, then Starkk stomps in base long before this fight even starts, because 22.5 to 5 is a 17.5 difference. It gets worse in Res 1 because in Res 1, the discrepancy is 25 to 112. If Ulquiorra is to have any chance, he needs Res 2 from the jump. Now, just because his spirit energy is slightly higher, this does not mean he wins, so let's look at some other factors. Next up, we have the speed section. Let's go. Starkk's speed is ridiculous, and it's not even funny. Starkk's speed, as stated in the Unmasked Data book, may not be the fastest speed Espada, but he is considered a top Espada in speed. He may be a close number 2 to Zamari, and I think it needs to be noted that just because someone is stated to be faster, it does not necessarily mean they're faster by a mile. It could be very close. Starkk is able to easily keep up with the speed of Shunsui, whose flash up is considered impressive by head captain Yamamoto. In the first data book, both Shunsui and Byakuya have the same speed stat at 90. Starkk was able to outspeed both a fully healed Bankai Ichigo and a battle-worn Kenpachi. Starkk disappeared before they could react or give chase. Just to emphasize this feat, neither Ichigo or Kenpachi were caught off guard. Kubo goes out of his way to show Starkk appearing, stopping, grabbing Orihime, talking to both of them, and then disappearing before they could even get to him. He pulls this off while carrying Orihime. Ichigo has feats showing comparable speed to Byakuya, and this is the same Ichigo that fights Ulquiorra. In my opinion, the speed difference here is significant because Starkk was able to take Orihime away without Ichigo realizing it. Ulquiorra does show moments of blitzing Ichigo, but their speed is about even. Ulquiorra doesn't show off imperceptible speed until his Res 2 form. In Res 1, Ichigo could barely keep up with Ulquiorra to the point he was overwhelmed, but he could still perceive Ulquiorra, he was just too slow to react. A perfect example is Ichigo blocking his lance with a Getsuga. Ulquiorra isn't that fast in base. I'd say his speed is about average amongst the Espada, as Grimmjow seemed to be able to keep some pace with him. Starkk covered a massive distance with Orihime on his back. The same feat took fully healed Bankai Ichigo much longer to clear, and he had every reason to go get there as fast as he could. And if anyone wants to argue carrying Orihime doesn't add any problem, it is shown that carrying someone does slow your speed abilities down. All of these feats are base form Starkk. What's most impressive is Starkk dodged 2 sneak attack blitzes from Shunsui and was able to successfully blitz Shunsui twice, once with Wonder Weiss and later when playing Iraoni. Starkk was able to casually dodge his own Cero Blast coming back at him, and they came back at him faster than he shot them. We don't know how much the speed is increased when Jushiro reflects attacks, but we know it is faster. Not only could he dodge them, he was quick enough to observe every moment from the time they were absorbed to the point that they were shot back. This also plays with his reaction speed. Starkk also doesn't need to take a stance to shoot a Cero, unlike other Espada. What's even more impressive is that Starkk was ready to shoot 1,000 Cero at Jushiro and was ready to dodge them if he was able to reflect them back. That's scary. I think this easily goes to Starkk. Alright guys, let's get on to the flashy stuff. I know you're going to like this. Attack power. Both Ulquiorra and Starkk have access to the cero Escudos ability, meaning they don't really have any advantage in the Cero department unless you want to count Stark's pistols, which may give him a better firing rate. Starkk has Cero Macheta and his wolves, which is also called the Camarada ability. The wolves themselves must be at least equal to a Cero Escudos for him to use it over them, maybe because it gives him a numbers advantage or increases the angle of attacks, or it's just more powerful than the Escudos because it is considered his ultimate attack. We've seen soul amps in Bleach before, which is what he does. He tears off a piece of his soul and creates these wolf soul Cero bullets. Both times we see it, it gives a person a ridiculous boost. First was with Chad using it against Shunsui, where Shunsui states that if you can shave off a part of your soul to boost your abilities. Nemu, when we saw her fight against Pernida, she was able to one-shot Pernida arms, who at that time were a post-Muken Kenpachi level. Same logic of comparison applies to Escudos that we talked about, and also applies to Ulquiorra and his Lanza. Either the Lanza gives him an advantage over Escudos, or it's blatantly just more powerful. A handful of wolves knocked Love and Rose out of their mass forms with Shikai, and severely wounded them to the point that the fight was over. Ulquiorra was able to perform a similar feat by peeling Ichigo's mask off with his Escudos ability. Now, onto a part that's very contentious, and I know people are going to really disagree with me about this, but you cannot use the size of blast to determine the strength or power of something. For example, let's take a look at the Lanza compared to Ichigo's Cero, which we know that Ichigo's Cero is as powerful as the Lanza, if not more. The blast is actually significantly smaller than you see with the Lanza. So trying to say that the Lanza has a bigger explosion or more detonative power than the wolves kind of doesn't make sense. Also note that Ulquiorra says he can't control the Lanza del Relampago, which means his accuracy with it is garbage. White didn't dodge the attack, he stood still as it flew past him. Even if you claim he only missed by a little bit, that is kind of damning against someone who has speed like Starkk. And if you interpret it as Ulquiorra means he can't control his power, then that means his explosion isn't all that impressive, seeing as it's not a repressed attack. Starkk had large explosions as well, but he had to contain his attacks as to not hurt the other Espada and not to destroy FKT. Starkk has reason to hold back, while Ulquiorra does not in the situations where we see their stronger attacks. Ulquiorra was throwing away from Las Noches toward White, who was far away. Now, I'm not saying Stark's attacks are stronger, just that you can't gauge power off the explosion. No matter how you slice it, Ulquiorra's Lanza del Relampago is not a one-hitter quitter against Starkk anyway. My verdict is a draw. Ulquiorra might have the single most powerful attack, but Starkk has the variety on his side. Next up is durability, endurance, and regen all in the same category. We kind of know who's going to win this one, but let's talk about it anyway. Ulquiorra's Hierro is pretty nice. It's been shown outright negating Shikai and Bankai Ichigo swings. Grimmjow's Spirit Energy strikes completely swapped away, and even a Cero. And a wave from Kisuke's Benihime. His Hierro is impressive. It's strong enough to allow Ulquiorra to punch a hole in Bankai Ichigo's chest, mortally wounding him. I'm not going to take away from his Hierro because we only ever seen his Res 2 Hierro penetrated by White. But like I said, that's not really a bad thing because that'd be like, oh, he got cut down by Aizen. Aizen's powerful. His wings and Hierro were slapping away Uryu's arrows without effort, but this isn't impressive seeing as those things could barely penetrate Yami's base skin. Out of the Espada, Ulquiorra has the best regeneration ability. The only one who seems to be even close is Neutra. Ulquiorra's regen will almost instantly regenerate full limbs and even his body. Ulquiorra cannot regenerate organs, so Instant destruction or a strong enough force to get through his hero could make them irreparable. Ulquiorra was shown still capable of producing an energy lance and using Sonito while on his deathbed in a non-fully formed leg. That's terrifyingly impressive. Starkk has shown similar endurance feats. He took a Shikai Kageyoni strike center mast while he was off guard. He was still capable of fighting evenly with Shunsui in swordplay, who had full access to his games, and he even blitzed Shunsui, delivering a severe strike to his back. Stark's hero also may be at the tippy top. Stark's hero took a Shikai Fire Blast from a mask on version of Love with no physical damage. He even took a full power swing from Love while he was off guard, and again, it didn't even scratch his hero. Starkk, outside of those 3 hits, his hero was never really tested due to his speed. Starkk never took a single hit until he was distracted by Baragon's death. Ulquiorra only engaged in a long fight with Ichigo, but Starkk fought 4 consecutive captains, and this is us looking at their actual endurance. 2 of the captains were Vizards, and the other 2 were 2 of the most powerful captains after Yamamoto and Unohana. Both Starkk and Ulquiorra took fatal wounds and kept fighting. They're about the same, but just because Ulquiorra has full regeneration in his limbs, I'm going to give him the slight edge here. And our final section is skill and intelligence. In swordplay, Starkk seemed to match Shunsui blow for blow in swordsmanship. He fought a dual-wield Shunsui with 1 blade, then later matched him with dual blades using his Komilo ability, which allows him to make spirit energy weapons. This is also probably how he makes his pistols. His perception skills are ridiculous. He completely figured out Shunsui's sword skill, and he was a dual-wield user, and which hand was his dominant hand and which wasn't, just after a brief exchange. Then he did the same to Jushiro's Shikai ability after only 3 shots. Then in his final battle with Shunsui, he deduced the ability of each game after only seeing them 1 time. Stark's combat ability and IQ seemed to be almost second nature to him. Ulquiorra, on the other hand, began to make observations on how similar Ichigo's Black Yatsuga is to his cero Escudos, and he seemed to surpass Ichigo in sword technique. Ichigo is no slouch in the sword skill department. Ikkaku himself commented on how well Ichigo was as a swordsman, thinking his master must have been impressive to teach him in such a short time. Ichigo even matched swordplay with Kenpachi shortly after this. However, I'd say Shunsui is the far more impressive fighter, and the fact that he's willing to resort to any tactic to win, yet he was never actually able to catch Starkk off guard until Starkk nerfed himself and was distracted by his own depression, death of Baragon, yada yada. Ulquiorra also has some pretty good observation skills, seeing as he deduced Orihime's Fullbring powers were irregular. Ulquiorra is quite observant and analytical, but Stark's feats are far more impressive to me. Not to mention, Grimmjow outsmarted Ulquiorra with the Caja Negacion in their brief exchange and was able to trap him. So when it comes to skills and intelligence, I have to give it to Starkk. So let's go with the verdict. I think the first 2 rounds are easy. Base versus base, it's not close. Starkk stomps. Res 1 versus Res 1, again, it's not even remotely close. It's a stomp. The interesting part is Res 2 versus Res 1. So let's get into how I think the fight would actually play out. What I think the deciding factor of this fight is speed and capability. Stark's base speed and possible boost to his speed and res are far more impressive than anything Ulquiorra does up to res 2. This gets even more dangerous against Camarada because the wolves do not go down to physical attacks. You need spirit energy attacks to defeat them. Now, I do think either version of Ulquiorra's lance would be able to do the trick, even if you just hit it, but Starkk can create at least 40 wolves, and he can coordinate them. This is not good for Ulquiorra. The lance doesn't stop multiple wolves at a time, and just because he hits one, that doesn't mean it won't stop them from detonating. They don't need to make contact to detonate. If Ulquiorra doesn't immediately go to res 2 after Starkk goes res in their fight, it's over. He needs res 2. And even when we look at res 2, their parameters are much more even, but not being able to control the Lanza against an opponent with comparable or potentially faster speed, it's not really useful for throwing. Starkk is a much better close-range fighter and shows more combat IQ. Ulquiorra's defense hasn't shown the ability to outright negate Wolf Blasts or powerful cero Escudos from Starkk or even the Komilo Blades. And honestly, since they have comparable SP, this is very likely. Ulquiorra's regen doesn't help him too much here because most of Stark's attacks are going to be concussive or burning, meaning they could pass through the Hierro. And if Comilo Blades can penetrate his skin and hit those organs deep enough, he won't be able to regen them. Also, Cero Matrieta is an overwhelming powerful attack that Starkk has that probably would have gotten Shunsui, depending on how you interpret the position of where he was. Ulquiorra shows the speed to possibly escape it, but I don't know if he could escape Cero Matrieta several times. If Ulquiorra can detonate Lanza on Starkk multiple times while minimizing damage to himself, and by that I mean being able to hit Starkk at a distance with it, because if he detonates it up close, it's actually likely to also take himself out. Otherwise, I don't really see any win conditions for Ulquiorra aside from landing Lanza from a distance. So I got Starkk 8 times out of 10. I think Starkk is the strongest Espada not named Yami, and this is how I determine who's the strongest. Not just who has the highest spirit energy, it's having the full package. And so the winner today is Starkk. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Please, I want to hear if you disagree with me, if you agree with me. If you think my math was wrong, let me know. If you think Ulquiorra or have some proof that Ulquiorra Segunda Etapa is a 10 or that Res is a 10 and it's something contradicts the data book, let me know. If you say something about Kisuke saying it's similar to Bankai, I'm letting you know that when Kisuke said that, he was referring to how Bankai, basically it's the core of their power, just like a Bankai is. The Res and the Bankai are both the core of the Shimigami and Hollow's power. He's not talking about the boost it gives. I also want to address the narrative argument. I always hate this one. Aizen left Ulquiorra in Hueco Mundo because he knew he could get the most out of Ichigo. Well, let's flip this scenario. If we put Starkk in Hueco Mundo, Ichigo dies a lot sooner because Bankai Mask on Ichigo wouldn't even be able to beat base Starkk. Not to mention that Ulquiorra really wouldn't be able to compete with the more powerful captains in FKT. He would die very quickly. And again, we know that Aizen doesn't know about the form. You can say, well, he knows. Just because Ulquiorra didn't show him doesn't mean he doesn't know. But you have to prove that he knows. In that memory flashback, it's Ichigo thinking about Segunda Etapa, not Aizen. So, like, subscribe, comment. Y'all have a good day. Bye.